What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Lucky Eights. We're on 8.8. We're doing a little decolonization in the Middle East. If you're not getting the hang of this, we're kind of bouncing around from region to region, just kind of doing a little explanation of how areas ended imperialism, gained independence, and kind of made the modern world that we have today with all these different countries. So we're going to bounce around to 3 countries here. I hope this isn't too confusing because we did India, we did Vietnam, we did Sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to do Middle East. So we're really doing a lot of different places. Here's kind of the trick to this. For the AP exam, you don't need to memorize all of these places. They're just different examples, and my goal is, and the hope here is that some of them will stick in your head. For my guys, you do need to know some of this stuff for the region, so I'm kind of double dipping here with a little more focus on the regions in the AP exam. But like I said, India is the main place, but let's do a little Middle East here. After World War I, let's start with Turkey, okay? So what was formerly the Ottoman Empire, just a reminder, after World War I, the Ottoman Empire lost. They were on the side of the Central Powers after World War I. Remember, World War I is really the key to this time period of, we see this huge change and impact of World War I, and then a huge impact of World War II as well. But after World War I, Britain and France are going to take control of the former Ottoman Empire. And essentially what they do is they take the former Ottoman Empire and they make one part of it an independent republic called Turkey, and it's going to be a democratic government. And just as a side note before we get into Turkey, the rest of this region becomes mandates. They become part of the British, or the under British and French control. And the British and the French say about these areas, we're going to control these areas until you're ready for independence. Now, similar to what we saw in Africa, these borders used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and they are just randomly drawn by the French and the British. They don't care who lives there. They're not like analyzing like different ethnic groups and different religions and whether you're Shia or Sunni. They just dump everybody into these countries together. So this is a random drawn political border by the British and the French. The problem is, and this is still a problem today, if you know any of these issues in Iraq, Syria, Iran, like these issues on these borders are created by the French and the British after World War I. And for example, in Iraq, and I don't want to get into this too much, but in Iraq, the majority of the population there is Shia, the minority is Sunni, and it leads to issues and tensions today because they're all kind of dumped in one country when they eventually get their independence. But that's a side note. In terms of Turkey specifically, Turkey is going to become independent, and it's going to be run by this group of called the Young Turks. If you remember in the Reform Reaction period, the Young Turks were the people who pushed for democratic ideas and independence in kind of a Western way, and they were eventually overturned by a new sultan who canceled out those reforms. Well, after World War I, this Young Turk group led by this guy here, Kemal Mustafa Ataturk, that's him right here, he is going to take control of Turkey and become this democratic leader or figure. You can see he is dressed in a kind of a Turkish way with this hat on, but really kind of a Western-looking military uniform here, and even his facial hair for the time period is Western. And remember, key here is how people are dressed and what they look like. His goal was to Westernize Turkey. What that means in 1923 is you have a democratic government. You're going to increase the role and rights of women, which is not as common in some of these areas in 1923 in the Middle East and also around the world. You're going to end the use of Arabic script, and you're going to go to a Westernized style Latin alphabet with an alphabet, different letters symbolizing different things that you can put together and make words, similar to what we have in English. And then you're also going to modernize the military and economic system. So free trade economic policies, modernize the military by bringing in Western people who can train our soldiers. Turkey, up until the past couple of years, was seen as kind of the beacon of the Middle East in terms of how Westerners looked at Turkey. Very modernized, very Westernized, a lot of freedoms. In the past couple of years, that has changed a little bit with the new president that came in, but that's another story for another day. Outside of there, connected back, so this area right here is what we would call today kind of this is the Holy Land, all right? So this area right here contains Jerusalem, Bethlehem, a lot of these kind of historical Judeo-Christian sites. During the late 1800s, a group of people, the Jewish people, before World War I, before World War II, were pushing to have their own homeland out of this area here in the Middle East, which is, and I'm going to come back to the big map here, that's this map, right, this part right here. This group of people who are Jewish kind of say, everyone else is getting their own country. We don't want our own country in Europe. And not all Jewish people believe in this, by the way. But there's these Jewish nationalists who say, we want our own country that's promised to us in our covenant with God. and that we want our own country called Israel. And it's led by this guy right here, Theodor Herzl, and he pushes this belief along with the supporters that they should get their own country in the Holy Land. And most people in Europe at the time are like, nah, bro, like, and the anti-Semitism is on the rise, and there's some people who are anti-Semitic who are like, yeah, let's give the Jews their own homeland so they can get out of our country. But for the most part, there's not much traction with it. After World War I, when we see a rise in nationalism around the world, a British official with the last name Balfour writes this document that basically promises the Jewish people their own land. He did not have the authority to guarantee this land to people, but he basically says, yeah, I'm kind of down with that. Now, after World War I, this land is under the control of the British because it's a British mandate. So there's talk of this, and there's kind of this rise in Zion, what's called Zionism, this idea, this belief that the Jewish people should get their own homeland. Then World War II happens. Obviously, 60% of, hopefully we remember this, 60% of the Jewish population in Europe, roughly, is killed during the Holocaust and the subsequent invasions of countries in Europe. And the newly formed United Nations says the Jewish people should get their own country, and we will call it Israel. And they create a partition plan. This is like the theme after World War II. We have all these places getting split. And they say, we're going to give the Jewish people part of this area of the Holy Land. So the things in orange here are going to be part of the Jewish state. The purple areas will be under Palestinian control, and the Palestinians are, for the most part, Arab Muslims. So they'll get this area, and then the area that's under, and that some of this area will be under like a neutral area. And so Jewish people, now there were some Jewish people who'd lived there, who've been living there for thousands of years, but Jewish people who need somewhere to go and resettle after World War II start flooding into this region and essentially lead to tension between the people who have lived there, the Palestinian Muslims, and this new country that's going to be created called Israel, which is backed by all of the world's superpowers, Britain, France, the United States at the time. Today, this area is the main source of conflict in the Middle East. It is kind of the talking point of those who commit, who are from the Middle East and are committing terrorist attacks around the world, that this area is the source of the conflict. Because around this area of this Jewish country here, you have a whole bunch of Muslim countries. And the U.S., the British, the French, a lot of countries around the world pump money and support this country that was created after World War II, essentially for Jewish resettlement after World War II. Israel is a close ally of the United States today. They help the United States in fighting the war on terror. They also are a cultural ally of the United States today. However, as Israel has grown since World War II, since 1947 when they got their partition, they have continued to expand their land and territory into land that used to be under Palestinian rule. And these are called settlements. So Palestinian people are being kicked off of their land in favor of Jewish resettlement or Jewish settlements. And the Palestinians who get kicked off get angry and are forced to leave, which oftentimes has some of them joining what are considered by the United States government to be kind of terrorist acts. So these are the number of Palestinians who have been or who are considered refugees by the United Nations today. About 470,000 in Lebanon, almost 500,000 in Syria, 2.2 million in Jordan, 1.4 million in Gaza, and 800,000 in the West Bank. These are people who have been forced over the years to become refugees, leaving their homeland, leading to even more tension in the Middle East. No black and white answer to this. There's a lot of gray. And one last piece of this entire Middle East puzzle is there is a revolution that happens in 1979. We probably talked a little bit about this in class, and in 1979, in Iran, there's a corrupt Western-backed government. And this corrupt Western-backed government is led by this guy right here, who's known as the Shah. You can see he's dressed in Western clothing, which symbolizes he's probably pro-West. He's corrupt, but he supports the United States and a lot of democratic countries. There's an opposition group who is led by this guy. His name is the Ayatollah Khomeini, and he is anti-West. He is a strict Shia Muslim religious leader. So he hates the West, wants to be opposite of the West. He wants to create essentially a theocratic or a government based on Shia religious principles. This is Iran coming back here. This is one of the few Shia majority countries in the world. And he wants it to be based on Shia ideas. We're going back to, if you go back to, we're talking like the Safavid Empire, okay? So there's a connection between all that. The outcome is this: the Shah gets sick. He needs to go see medical attention, so he leaves the country. A revolution breaks out, in which led by the Ayatollah, and they are going to create an Islamic Republic. And how Iran looks is they have a couple focuses. One, they are anti-West, no Western books, the typical Western freedoms. The idea of women who are working is kind of taken away. So in Iran pre-revolution, women could wear what they want. They could have different jobs. They get rid of that. Women aren't allowed to drive cars, things that, basic freedoms that people would just assume that most people around the world have today. They also focus on ending, their goal is to destroy and eliminate Israel. So coming back, there's that connection between the two, and building up of nuclear weapons, and essentially a way that they claim to protect themselves. They also are going to fight a war in the between 80 and 88 between Iran and Iraq. Iraq was run by a Sunni by the name of Saddam Hussein, but there are a large Shia population, and Iran invades Iraq in hopes of uniting all of those Shia. To this day, Iran focuses on proxy wars, helping out Shia minority groups in different countries in the Middle East through mainly different types of terrorist activities. So that's the Iranian Revolution. We got Iran, Israel, and Turkey. 3 very different countries, but all kind of an example of decolonization in the Middle East. That's what I got. Got any questions? You write it down. We're almost done Unit 8. We're almost there. We're almost there. We're almost